Welcome and thank you for watching. I'm Greg Martineau, Superintendent of the Public Schools of Northborough and Southborough. One of my goals as Superintendent is to communicate key issues and the great work that is happening in our schools to the communities of Northborough and Southborough. One means of communicating is using the community's outstanding cable access resources, NCAT and SAMS. This episode is the launch of a show called The Superintendent's Corner, and the topic for this episode is sleep. And we hope this show does not put you to sleep, but rather educates you on the science of sleep and how it impacts adolescent development. I'm fortunate to have three guests join me today. First, I'd like to welcome Kathleen Palechko. Kathleen is the Vice Chair of the Regional School Committee and also serves as a liaison to the Start Time Task Force. Again, welcome.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Dr. Safdar Medina. Dr. Medina is a Massachusetts pediatrician in UMass Memorial Medical Group and has 20+ years of experience. Dr. Medina also serves as the district's appointed physician and is a member of the Start Time Task Force. Welcome, Safdar.
Thank you.
Our third panelist or guest is Carrie Toole. Carrie Toole is a LICSW, and is the Director of Castlebrook Counseling in Westborough and is an independently licensed clinical social worker who specializes in dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which could be a show on its own.
Sure could.
She too has over 20 years of experience and is a member of the Start Time Task Force. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you.
So I thought we'd start the show with Kathleen talking a little bit about the history of start time in our district. It's not a new topic. And if you can provide the community with an overview of the work that's taken place thus far.
Okay, well, so the history of the Start Time Committee is basically back in 2014. A parent group who was concerned with student sleep deprivation came to the then superintendent and the then chair of the regional school committee, which happened to be me, and came to us and told us of their concern and asked what we could do about it. So over the course of the last 5 years, we've had many presentations to the school committee about the serious issues surrounding our students, about them not getting enough sleep and what is happening to their biology. And I think we all on the school committee agree that the science is compelling, that we should be able to do something about it. And the question is, how do we do it? What do we do? We started investigating the issues surrounding moving the high school start time and quickly discerned that transportation was going to be the major mitigating factor. So the school committee seemed to be in favor of moving start time as long as there was no budget impact to the high school budget. But since that did not seem to be an immediate solution, not impacting the budget, we started seeing what else we could do for our students. So in 2014, an Algonquin study group was formed, and through focus groups and surveys, they identified 4 main reasons students didn't get enough sleep. And they were in order of what the students felt: homework, the stress of being overscheduled and just being students, the early start time, and technological devices and how compelling they were and how late they were staying up on all their phones and their devices. So in the past 5 years, we focused on exploring different options for the high school, including changes in homework load and timing. The teachers and administration have continuously worked on that and continue to this day. Bell schedule changes. There's been a lot of investigation into different paradigms and different things like flexible learning blocks, etc. Educating the students and their parents on issues surrounding sleep hygiene in general. Hosting public informational sessions, like having presenters like Judith Owens, who you all know, a renowned adolescent sleep expert, and incorporating awareness of sleep factors on performance into the high school curriculum. And those are just some of them. Obviously, we've had many more. In conjunction with those efforts, we also looked into changes to the bus schedules, but any change was going to have an impact on every student in the K-12 district. So at this juncture, we figured that this issue is a completely community-based issue and that all 3 school committees and all 3 districts need to be involved in the decision, any decision-making process. So a couple years ago, we did a pretty deep dive into moving the whole system 20 minutes, but everyone agreed that such a move would create a sufficient enough amount of chaos that if we were to do that, 20 minutes just wasn't even worth it. So we said, all right, if we're going to do this, let's really investigate it. Let's decide what the real right amount of time to create all this chaos would be to make it worth it. So now we're at the point we're going to assess scenarios for transportation. We're going to explore how much change our communities are willing to accept. So last year, we established our 41-member task force, which we are all part of. And we hired a bus consultant so that we could really dive into, okay, what are some, thinking outside the box things that we can do other than just, throwing more buses at it. It would take a whole show to explain the complexity of our district when it comes to transportation issues, but I will try to sum it up with some bullets. The towns of Northborough and Southborough share 32 buses. Northborough has 17, Southborough has 15. They all start at the high school, and then the Northborough buses serve the Northborough K-8 schools in 3 more tiers, and then the Southborough buses serve the Southborough K-8s in 2 different tiers. There are 10 different schools in all and 7 different start times. Southborough K-8 is a grade span configuration, so we have, K1, and then another school is 2-3, and then another school is 4-5, and then the middle school. And in Northborough, it's neighborhood schools. So they're all K-5, and then they all go up to the middle school. So those 2 different configurations make for a very challenging bus scenario, bus issues. The high school is technically its own town, its own district, which means that we, as the Algonquin Regional High School District, are considered a regional school district, so we get regional transportation reimbursement from the state. But that means that there are also very complex rules and mandates that accompany that reimbursement that we have to follow. So when it comes to just flipping the buses or any scenarios like that, it just isn't that easy. In addition to students, making a major change to the start times and end times of our school also impacts that we know there's more, but major ones are teachers and their personal schedules, so they have to be brought into the conversation. All before school and after school activities, including athletics. So all of those people have to be brought into the conversation. The community use of fields, gyms, and facilities. So this impacts the entire community. Before and after school programs like extended day and any kind of childcare programs and companies. Traffic patterns are going to affect all commuters, basically everyone in our communities. The local employers that employ high school students, they need to be brought into the conversation as well. And the students who provide childcare for younger siblings, or not even younger siblings, even just neighborhood friends, etc. So that is just about everybody. And that is where we have come to today, and that is why we are trying to engage everybody in the conversation, and to do that, we need to educate everybody.
I think it speaks well to the complexities of our district, and our saying, 10 schools, 3 districts, 1 community of learners.
Yep.
And when we embark in trying to solve issues like changing schedules, it does take a community effort.
Right.
So I think that was well said. So a lot of work has been done over the years, and that work continues.
Yes.
And this year, the Start Time Task Force has really created a 3-phase process to bring a decision or some recommendations to the school committee. Right. And really phase 1 is about education, and that's why we're here today, to talk about the science of sleep. And I'm going to ask Carrie and Safdar, why is sleep important? What happens when we don't get sleep? What happens when we do get enough sleep?
So biologically, sleep is absolutely essential. A lot of changes happen in our body when we sleep. So once we get into our 3rd and 4th stages of sleep that are our deep sleep, we actually have many changes going on. The first is our muscles relax, we increase blood flow to the muscles. And when we do that, we actually allow our muscles to repair, other tissue repair occurs, our immune system releases chemicals called cytokines, which actually help our immune function by attacking infection and inflammation. And then we also get into stages of sleep that are REM sleep, where our eyes move rapidly. And when we're in REM sleep, that's when we dream, but that's when our muscles are completely immobile, giving our body a lot of relaxation. We also release hormones during sleep which control hunger. So lack of sleep actually reduces the hormone that suppresses hunger, and the level of the hormone that is responsible for increasing our hunger goes up. So all these changes have to be kept in mind when we want to talk about sleep with our children.
And when we talk about sleep and adolescence, is is there a recommendation in terms of how much sleep an adolescent should get each evening?
So an adolescent should get between 8 and 10 hours of sleep, with attempting to average between 9.25 and 9.5 hours a night, in order for all those essential functions of sleep to occur.
And as a pediatrician, what are some of the impacts you're seeing of students who are sleep deprived?
We're seeing a lot of impacts, particularly in our high school students. The number one in terms of physical impact is obesity. A, because of those hunger hormones, and B, because when you are sleep deprived, your eating habits tend to be poor. The second thing that we're seeing is an increase in type 2 diabetes as a result of that obesity. The third thing is kids who are sleep deprived are more likely to get infections because their immune system was not able to do what it was supposed to do at night. The fourth thing, obviously, is the stress and anxiety that is created when children and adolescents in particular aren't getting enough sleep. And I can turn to you for more on the stress and anxiety part, Carrie,
absolutely.
that you're seeing in your practice.
Yes, we're seeing tons of referrals coming in for anxiety, depression, mood dysregulation, and looking at all the, my specialty is with adolescents, and I can, set a schedule to when they report these troubles begin for them, and it's somewhere around middle school. So, the sleep does shift, not just needing more sleep in terms of that 9.25 hours, their melatonin release also shifts. So, when we could get the kids to sleep, my kids are in bed by 7:30, but with an adolescent, their melatonin doesn't start releasing until closer to 11, sometimes later. So they're not getting the sleep at the times when their body tells them to. Similar to, there's a lot of data and research about shift workers, right? So nurses, police officers, firefighters, and when people are awake when their body is telling them to sleep, there's all kinds of physiological factors that come into play that can cause some long-term damage. Physically and definitely emotionally. So, there's a lot of data out there about how, with adolescents specifically, anxiety and depression are significantly on the rise. And one of the data points that has really resonated for me recently is that about 5 years ago, the adolescent suicide became the second leading cause of death instead of the third. So there's a lot of alarm bells for those of us in the mental health profession that are ringing. And when we see kids coming in who are sleep deprived by, a third of what their sleep should be, if I had 2 or 3 less hours of sleep every night, it would not be pretty, right? And my brain is fully formed, theirs aren't, right? And I'm not expected to do calculus or, remember details about the War of 1812, right? So there's a lot of factors that impacts their learning, impacts their mood regulation, their amygdala, their hippocampus, and the cortisol levels that are, really flowing when you're physically under stress of sleep deprivation. And it just is, they're feeling the impacts for sure, yeah.
So I am a father of a teenage daughter who I feel is probably most likely sleep deprived. And I noticed that on the weekends she tries to catch up on sleep. She often sleeps in late on the weekends and naps. Is that common?
It's unfortunately very common, and what it does is unfortunately disrupt your natural circadian rhythm. So that catch-up sleep really isn't catch-up sleep. It's actually making things worse for them during the week.
And I also think that when we talk about sleep, I often hear people share that, oh, I don't need that much sleep, or it's a badge. I only need 4 hours of sleep. Is that, are we more productive? Can we be more productive with lack of sleep, or is it actually counterintuitive? We're less productive.
We're definitely less productive, and especially adolescents. I mean, when we look at what they report when they're sleep deprived, the primary thing is I cannot pay attention in class. I'm falling asleep in class. They are not productive, and that goes through for adults as well, because your brain also needs to shut off and get the same rest that we talked about, your muscles and your immune system.
And what role does sleep play in the learning process? I often hear recommendations, you're better off, studying for an hour, not cramming, letting your brain rest. What role does, sleep play in learning, and in organizing memory and thoughts in the brain.
Completely.
Yeah.
I mean, it is completely responsible for that. There's such a direct correlation between sleep and academic performance, and even, you know, looking at kids who probably may be erroneously diagnosed with ADHD, but are really sleep deprived.
Anxiety,
and I'm sure that's what you're seeing
Anxiety
as well.
Yep.
And in terms of, you know, how are students trying to cope with a lack of sleep? Like, what are they leaning to? Like, what are you seeing in terms of behavior?
Right, and you mentioned that a lot of kids are coming in with like arrhythmias now because of the significant caffeine use, right?
They are, and they do. I mean, when we look at, you know, melatonin levels, at 6 a.m., they have high melatonin levels. Their circadian drive, which is what arouses us, is not present at 6 a.m. So for them to get up, they need a stimulant of some kind to wake up. Now, keeping in mind, a cup of coffee may have about 100 milligrams of caffeine, but some of the energy drinks that they're drinking, such as, you know, Red Bull or Monster, have upwards to 400 milligrams of caffeine. So we are seeing kids coming in with high heart rates and arrhythmias from these caffeinated beverages. And caffeine, and what happens is, although their circadian rhythm is trying to arouse them, we also have another rhythm called our homeostatic drive, which helps us sleep. And those two constantly compete. And around mid-afternoon, a lot of us get a surge in our homeostatic drive, hence that afternoon siesta some of us crave. Well, adolescents who are already sleep deprived may want more of it, so they're drinking caffeine again at 2 or 3 o'clock. And then when we look at caffeine as far as how quickly our body can excrete caffeine, you really should stop caffeinated beverages 4 to 6 hours before trying to fall asleep naturally. So that caffeine use is impacting their sleep again at night, where it's making it harder for them to fall asleep.
And I think also that, you know, caffeine in your system stays in your system, so it impacts sleep anyway.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
It's a great disruptor.
And it's alerting, right? So it's a stimulant. So, you know, when their bodies are already under enough, you know, developmental stress and sleep deprivation stress, and let's add more, you know, vasoconstrictors to the game, right? Then, you know, they're just under, you know, physically and emotionally a tremendous amount of stress. And being able to acquire new skills under that level of stress in the brain is just not clicking, so they have to study harder or study longer to get the information, you know, implanted into their brains for what school is expecting you to do. And if you're still releasing melatonin for first period class, good luck. Right?
And so after you mentioned, we had a conversation first period, but also last period can be an impact. You know.
And that's exactly where they're increasing their homeostatic drive, just starting to kind of get them ready to fall asleep. They're already sleep deprived. So last period can be pretty tough for a lot of kids.
And you know, I'll admit, as a parent, I was keenly in tune to sleep patterns when my children were infants. It was all about sleep. And, you know, I think when my children stopped taking naps, it really wasn't a conversation my wife and I had around our children's sleep patterns. But it's so important, you know, it's equally as important when kids are adolescents and as an adult,
of course,
that we pay attention to those sleep patterns and get enough sleep. And I think it is a health epidemic. For sure. You know, and Kathleen, you mentioned other stressors, technology, homework, the pressure to perform.
Just all the overscheduling that these kids, a lot of these kids are under is just unprecedented.
And we talk about, you know, changing the start time of a school is not the quick fix. It's not the only issue that we have to pay attention to when thinking about our students' well-being. But what can parents do now in terms of helping their students develop sleep hygiene and habits that are healthy?
So there's a couple of things, and I want to focus on 2 of the main things. Number 1 is the overscheduling. And when we look at overscheduling, one of the big factors in overscheduling is athletic activities that maybe not involved with school, but other club athletic activities that sometimes can end at about 8 o'clock at night. Now you need about 4 hours to combat that endorphin surge that you got before you can actually think about falling asleep, because when you exercise, your circadian rhythm is really, really high at that point. So that arousal is very, very high. So that is one thing to try to avoid as much as possible, is physical activity. And sometimes even high school sports such as meets can go on and on until very, very late at night. The second thing, and I think we all have input on this one, is screen times. This is very challenging. There is the challenge of doing homework electronically, but that is something that can stop when homework is done. And then we can focus on going to sleep. Ideally, you're supposed to stop screen time between 30 and 60 minutes before your targeted bedtime. For some students, homework makes that a little tougher, but once they're done, that cell phone should be put away. And what I often recommend is a family charging station where everyone, including the adults, because we're their role models, they will watch what we do, put our devices away. Now, if you want to get very creative, you can actually buy something called a cell phone jail on Amazon that actually looks like a jail, and everyone locks their cell phone, and only one person has access to that key.
You lock the phone in it.
You lock the phone, yeah. And it sits in there all night till someone unlocks that cage in the morning, and it is on Amazon for those that are interested. But the point being is that this is a serious thing. You know, when I see that so many kids report to me in the office that they've been on social media till 1 or 2 a.m. Talking to other peers, that's very disturbing, and clearly they're not getting enough sleep because melatonin is a light-sensitive hormone. We cannot release melatonin if there's light around us.
And in terms of, you work with a lot of adolescents, are they reporting sleep as something that they're concerned about?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They're exhausted, and it's definitely something that they are very aware of, and pretty much every kid I talk to about sleep time and start time of schools is, very appreciative. There are a lot of complex factors involved with jobs and sports and all those pieces too, but they know that they need more sleep in order to function better. And I provide a lot of education in my groups and in my individual work, and work with families about, how the brain works and sleep in adolescence and frontal lobe development, and they are well aware that when they're more sleep deprived, being able to manage anxiety and depression is much more challenging. And we're getting a lot of referrals now, and have been in recent years, for a lot of kids that are very high functioning, high performing students. And the stress of it all is really exacerbating any sort of underlying anxiety and depression factors that are very common during adolescence anyways. Just because of brain development, the frontal lobe is not fully formed till your mid-20s, so that's the part of the brain that puts on the brakes and slows down the impulsivity. So there's a disconnect there, just developmentally. And then if they're sleep deprived on top of that, it's compounding for sure, right? And they're definitely using caffeine, other substances to try to perform, right? Because they are feeling this external pressure. A lot of what I do in my clinical work with dialectical behavior therapy focuses a lot on mindfulness practices, and what that does in the brain is it actually slows down that cortisol release, and it slows down the amygdala response. And you can teach yourself how to, be able to reduce that stress. So we do a lot of mindfulness practices, which a lot of my students and my clients, really adopt as something that helps them to regulate their moods. And we do work towards, better sleep hygiene routines, being able to kind of go to sleep at the same time, wake up at the same time, having structure is really beneficial to get into a habit. Having the families reduce screen time. A lot of kids talk about how their phone is their alarm, and Target's right down the street. We can easily get one of those plug-in clocks, and a lot of my clients talk about how they'll be getting messages throughout the night, not just up till 1 or 2, but then they finally go to sleep and somebody messages them at 3, and then they return, and it's just back and forth.
That fear of missing out.
That fear of missing out, right? So they're not getting that deep REM sleep because their sleep is continuously interrupted. And that's really problematic for being able to regulate emotions and the physiology of being able to kind of, recuperate after a day.
So when I think of high school students and teenagers, one major milestone is driving. So what impact does lack of sleep have on driving?
So it has been clearly shown that lack of sleep leads to increased risk for car accidents, and both in the morning going to school and both at that fatigue time they get at the end of the day. So it is a real safety issue.
And a lot of schools have, who have already shifted their start times, did a lot of data crunching with their students and with teenagers. And there was one in Wyoming that they shifted their start time back to 8:50, 8:55, and had a 70% decrease in car accidents with teenagers. Like, that's really significant, right? And there's a lot of studies about how sleep impaired driving is similar, if not worse, than alcohol impaired driving, right? So the reactivity is shortened. They're not able to see something and process it as quickly as they might if they were, you know, well rested.
Absolutely.
So communities and districts that have actually adopted a later start time, what impacts have they seen? Have they actually measurable outcomes in terms of the change?
So I think what we're looking at is there have been measurable outcomes in terms of less suspensions and less tardiness, and which is really, which is telling. I think, when we look at other parameters in Massachusetts, at least, this is still relatively new. Are we going to see a decrease in mental health diagnoses? One of the things that to build up on is substance use as well. And are we going to see, because that may be a little more measurable, because right now sleep deprivation can lead to self-medication, both with cannabis for anxiety and, unfortunately, Adderall, which has become the most widely abused prescription drug among teenagers now, simply because they want that stimulant high in the morning. And Adderall is just as dangerous as those caffeinated beverages in terms of its cardiac side effects when it's not monitored carefully.
So Kathleen, what time does our high school start and our middle school start?
So we did an analysis of us and the surrounding towns, and we are definitely, if not the earliest, one of the earliest. I think that goes back to the history of our sharing the buses. And we don't want the elementary kids to start school at 9:30. So our high school starts at 7:20. We get out at 1:50. Melican Middle School in Northborough starts at 7:50, which is actually within the realm of a good start time. And the Trotter Middle School starts at 8:03 and gets out at 2:25. Now, that being said, I also know that my kids never went to Trotter at 8:03 because they always had either band or some sort of before school activity. So just the line of cars dropping off kids before school because they could, because school started later. That's another concept that we have to watch out for, that we don't get sucked into that, because if we change start times, but then start, sports and music start doing things before school, we have, basically
defeated our goal.
Right,
defeated the purpose,
And I also think, although school starts at 7:20, students are waiting at the bus stop much earlier.
Because of the busing
It can be 6:30
tiers.
where they're, so, and if you think what it takes for a student to get up and get to the bus stop. So it is, for many students, it can be very challenging.
And I do know a lot of parents that drive their kids to the high school. They're not utilizing the buses because it's so early. So they're willing to, make the sacrifice to drive their kids to school in order to give them another 30 minutes of sleep, right? And I know, I'm at that early, where I'm located is in the earlier range of the school pickup time once my kids get to high school. So I'm, really.
And I can vouch for that as a parent of two children at Algonquin, that we drive our kids to school simply because of the fact that it gives them the extra 30 minutes of sleep.
And, I think I often hear parents will share, does it really make a difference? If we change the start time to a later time, will the 34 minutes make a difference in a student's life? It's only 34 minutes.
The data says yes, it does.
So
even 30 minutes makes a significant change in attendance, in attention, focus, grades, disciplinary action, sports injuries. Kids who are better rested have fewer sports injuries. So all kinds of different factors.
Absolutely, and it goes back to the fact that our everything in our body is a cycle. So an extra 30 minutes means you have started that circadian arousal, and it's a little bit better than it was at 6:15 versus 5:45. So your melatonin level might be a little less at 6:15 than 5:45. Not optimal, but better.
Actually, one of the most compelling student testimonials came during a snow day. and we had a wellness meeting, and so it was delayed 2 hours because everything was delayed 2 hours. But the student came, and he didn't even plan on giving us a testimonial, but he just said that with that 2 hours extra in the morning, what a difference it made. With just getting much more sleep, he was able to actually wake up instead of dragging himself out of bed. He was actually able to make himself breakfast, like a good, healthy breakfast, and then not scream to work, to school. So that was actually a sort of one of those aha moments for people on the wellness committee, and also the school committee members saying to the superintendent, "Please call the snow day the night before."
It's always nice when that can happen.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think it's an important reminder of who our stakeholders are.
Yes.
So we do have students, we have teachers, educators, we have parents, we have taxpayers. So it's really a community effort when thinking about this type of topic, and making sure we develop solutions to combat this epidemic. So in terms of surrounding districts, I think we mentioned a little bit of what's happening, and Kathleen, your opening, you talked about how we are unique. We're not like a Westboro.
No, we're not like anybody, actually. And that is because we are not just a regional school district, but we are a regional school district, and we are two separate K-8 districts, individual districts. So we are governed, literally governed, two different ways. And we have two different towns, and so the surrounding area towns that have been able to just flip a switch and do this, like Ashland and Westboro, is because they are one town with one governing school committee, superintendent, administration, and school buses. So they could just do the flip. There are some regional districts that have been able to make the change, but it has been at a huge monetary impact. So, but the good news is that I think that as most other schools and districts, make this change, it's going to make it easier to, in terms of the impact on things like athletics and music and art and things like that. But just handling the complexity of just the transportation is going to make this a very an endeavor that we are going to have to be very thoughtful and very communicative and educate as to why it's worth it.
So obviously this is not just a local issue, it's a state issue. What's happening across the Commonwealth in terms of this topic?
So I think there's a lot of momentum right now in the Commonwealth with numerous districts looking at this because of the science that's behind it and because of the preliminary data that clearly shows reduction in car accidents and suspensions and things like that. And my hope is there are some bills that now at the State House to mandate this as a state to give districts time, and hopefully that momentum will continue.
It has been brought into the legislation once already, and so there is some momentum going. And I know nationally, California just passed legislation that school is going to be pushed back, I believe, no earlier than 8:30 for high schools and 8 a.m. for middle schools. So that's going to be rolled out. And there are a number of other states that are looking to follow suit. So there's a lot of awareness that is growing nationwide about the benefits of matching school to what an adolescent sleep pattern actually is in order to benefit them educationally, emotionally, societally. So we have we're launching healthy adults into society.
Absolutely. So we covered a lot of topics and a lot of information. Is there any question that I did not ask, or any topic that you wanted to
Oh, I remember there was one little point. So as I was doing some research about the national factors, I learned that only 10% of high schools nationwide start school before 7:30. So this is not something that is, really that far out there for most of the country. We're kind of the outliers already. So the national average for a start time of a high school is 7:59. Wow. So we're
we're an outlier.
We're an outlier, exactly.
Not
so
in a good way.
I found that fascinating. Yeah, right, exactly. So I found that fascinating.
Anything from you, Seth?
I do. I want to, sort of create the teenagers really want to get more sleep, and they really, when they can't get up at 6 a.m., as we've explained, there's a physiological and biological reason for it, and there's also a physiological reason why they can't go to sleep at 8 o'clock. I see the biology in my own two teenagers every single day, where if they have less homework and nothing to do, they cannot fall asleep at 8 a.m. despite not being on a screen.
Yeah.
And despite not having to do anything else, simply because their circadian rhythm is not there yet. So that's something very important for us to remember, that we're really doing this because of science and nothing else.
So the argument that, if we start later, then kids are just going to stay up later and then still get the same amount of sleep. You're not finding that as...
Not in the data. They do stay up like a smidgen more.
Because of the circadian rhythm.
Because circadian rhythm, right?
Right.
Exactly. But they are getting, if a start time is pushed back for an hour in the studies that I've seen, they're getting at least 45, 50 minutes more sleep. So they are, shifting a smidgen, but it is resulting in better sleep. Yeah.
And it's more aligned to the circadian rhythm.
Correct.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Correct.
And the argument that, well, we're preparing adults for society, and in society you're going to have to get up and go to work at 8 o'clock, so you should just get used to it. Like you should train your body early.
Well, that's when you have a fully formed brain.
Right.
Right.
And that's
they
the
don't.
science of the adolescent.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you are in your mid-20s, your circadian rhythm goes back to what it was when you were 12.
Yeah.
So adults can actually wake up earlier and go to bed earlier. I mean, we all know it. I'm in bed by 9 o'clock. We all know that as adults.
And I think as an organization, we look,
Right.
we want to make sure our educators are healthy and prepared. And I think sleep is an important component. And sleep hygiene for employers is something that is a topic that is discussed nationally.
Right, right.
And an employee who sleeps well is a more productive employee. So I think it's important to note. So I want to thank the three of you. Thank you, Safdar. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The purpose for the show today was just education. We did not get into logistics and options. That is the next phase. So we will be spending time identifying some potential solutions to the challenges we face. And we'll be providing the community with opportunities to engage in the education and the scenarios and give us input and feedback. So that I think is the next step over the next three to 4 months. But a lot of great information. I always walk away speaking with the three of you, learning something new. So thank you. And I just want to, again, thank our three guests for sharing their expertise and perspective. For those viewers who are interested in learning more about the Start Time Task Force, please visit the website on your screen. And additionally, if you have any questions, you can email healthysleep@ennisboro.k12.ma.us. And again, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next episode.